Hello, I'm Norman Shiel. I've been supporting Exeter City for about 30 years. I decided it was time in the late 80s to introduce my son to the joys of supporting the local football team, and was fortunate enough to fix on the season in which Exeter won the league without losing a single home game in any competition. So that meant I would never stop supporting them and have been involved with the club ever since. I've tried to do that by various means. The best way, in my opinion, the thing I've enjoyed most is to engage actually with the players or members of their families, so that I've got to know some players and their descendants over the years, and that's not necessarily particularly famous people, but people who have been about and flourished before the war. Certainly the war is a profound cut-off, and a perfect example of that in terms of Exeter City is Dick Pym, the great goalkeeper, and I went to have tea with him. That's one of my great memories, is having tea in Topsham with him and actually meeting somebody, shaking hands with somebody, engaging with somebody who had taken part in the 1923 Cup final, which is one of my passions, that particular match, and Wembley itself, and this was the man who was the goalkeeper. Well, you know, you could build a whole edifice of wonderful memories if you could talk to somebody who'd actually been there. I got to know his son very well. His son gave me various things, and I've still got his son's autograph book, which he as a child built up in Bolton when he went there to live with his family. To me, you know, that is wonderful. I mean, it's priceless in the best sense of the word, not whether it's worth X, Y or Z pounds, but the fact that it's what it is, and it came directly from the person who did it, and he gave it to me because he could see that I was genuinely passionate about it. That to me what it's all about. You can go to an auction, as I have done, and you can buy stuff because you want it more than the next bidder. I've done that. If you really know what you're talking about, you can occasionally do well, where well means you get something that's worth more than you paid for it, because your knowledge, having worked on these things, is better than the next man's. I've had one big success in that respect, and that is to buy a Wembley Cup final shirt, which was sold having been played in one cup final, and I knew from details that in fact it was a much rarer one from the 1923 Cup final, the only one left. So I bought it as one thing, and it turned out to be something a great deal better. So that's one of the highs. But all right, that's a treasure, but quite a lot of the time some of the most special things are the memories of meeting people, writing to people, getting letters back from people. I have somewhere a nice letter back from Bobby Gurney, who played here in Exeter for Sunderland the day of the big match in the Cup when the brains came down. We got the record crowd, and he, in his little letter, talks, and this is years after he's dead now, but this was when he was an old man in his 80s. He had the courtesy to write back to me, because I tracked him down and wrote to him and talk about what a good show Exeter had put on the day. He didn't have to say that, but it was a link to one of our great historical games. So I treasure that letter as much as I treasured the jersey, if you see what I mean, but in a totally different way. It seems to me that Exeter City is never, I don't say the wrong thing, but it's never going to be a great big club. In a sense, that's part of its charm. It is a homely, community-based club. It proudly asserts that, you know, we own our club, and that mantra is, to me, an entirely positive thing. So if you drill down beyond that and say, surely the past enriches the present and, as it were, enlightens the future, just as was the case when we had all the wonderful celebrations and the community play in the Northcott about the trip to Brazil. If you sort of build from that, anything in my view which helps people appreciate, and this is me as a sort of museum-based person in terms of heritage generally, with my work on coins and my involvement as a former councillor with Exeter's Museum, RAM. I see this as a sort of inspirational thing, the thing that brings to life what would otherwise just be odd snippets and rumours and tales, or worse still, lost altogether. And if it can be done in a way that doesn't just make it musty and fusty and dull and boring like old style museums often were, but can make it, oh, really? Did we do that? Did that really happen here? Is this the sort of club I've become involved with, and what will we go on to build? I see it as a sort of socially positive thing for children and for visitors and anybody who's interested in the subject, which is in this case football. So I'm passionately committed to museums as good things. I started, as most children did, by asking anybody I ever met who was supposedly interested in football if they had anything, and in most cases they didn't, but you get given the odd things. And in the 60s, as a schoolboy, you wrote to clubs up and down the country, and most of them had the good grace to send you a free programme, because you wanted a programme, you wanted the really basic stuff, but you wanted a programme from every club in the country, 90 odd clubs. You send off a load of postage stamps, please can I have one of your programmes? And most of them wrote back. That was the sort of very low grade bottom line. But over the years, I suppose I've never tried to bankrupt myself. But as I've said to my sons, you didn't get taken to Disneyland, or you didn't get taken to Centre Parks or whatever normal parents do to their children now, because I chose to spend my money on the sorts of things that I collected, not to the extent of meaning that you ever went short of food, clothes and a good education, but because I decided that A, this was what was important to me, and B, ultimately, if I did a half-decent job, it would be a sound investment. And having sold a substantial proportion of my collection, I have to say, that is the case, it's been sold, I was able to realise enough to help my children out with starting on the housing ladder. And so, in a sense, they have got the benefits, but not necessarily in the way that other people might have thought of as normal. It was programmes first, and they are the sort of thread or strand that's run right the way through from the 60s when I started, and that's what I've still got. Not the very best ones, I had to include selling some of the very best ones. The FA Cup's been my specialism. I've always had a passion for the FA Cup, the finals, where they were, who was in them, etc, etc. And so I got some really, really rare early FA Cup final programmes. They've had to go, but I still have a reasonably good collection of league programmes and related items, especially the pre-war ones. But other than that, I think it tended to be shirts and caps, because to me they represented special games and special occasions in the lives of quite often normal but sometimes special players. So other things were extras and not without interest, and I had a few medals, and some of the medals I eventually got one cup winners medal. That was a long ambition to find one of those that I could afford, but I got one. No longer have it, but I liked caps very much, and I liked shirts very much, because you felt this isn't just some Mickey Mouse. Nowadays players are supposed to get given several shirts per game so they can keep one, sign one, give one to the sponsors, swap one with their granny and so forth. But to me, in the earlier days, pre-war cup final, you got a shirt. Dick Pym told me I used the shirts to go fishing in. I cut the badge off, put that in the drawer, and wore the shirts out.